It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, I'd like to start with you this morning. When I start to look at what Joe Biden's life is right now, with his son being convicted, and this remarkable consistency on polls, it's not looking good for him. And at the same time, Donald Trump seems to be able to do no wrong in terms of the polls. And I have to ask a somewhat sobering question today. I mean, is this over? Are we kind of kidding ourselves that the results will change by November?
Well, I certainly don't think it's been determined yet. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons is what we've talked about before. And that is a lot of voters have simply not tuned in. Many of them were discouraged and didn't even show up at the polls to vote for Trump or for Biden. And I think there's going to be a lot of focus in the weeks and months to come. I also think that all the advantages are all in Biden's favor if they can communicate and capitalize on an improving economy, inflation that seems to be managed and under control. And so people are still very frustrated. They don't like the choices, and they're certainly flagging that in the polls. But I just don't think that polls are never predictive, and I think in this case that they can't be considered to be predictive. It certainly looks as though it's going to remain a very close race. But when voters go to the polls, a lot of Republicans vote for Nikki Haley. A lot of Democrats at a recent congressional race, and Republicans came out and voted, and kind of with the Democrats getting a surprising margin. So I just don't think it's over. If the economy was to go south, if the inflation was to rise, I think it probably would be over, but I don't think that's the trend.
Al, you've been saying this for over a year, that this economy has never been more robust since Biden took office, and yet that has not moved the polls. And I go back to the question that I asked Craig. I mean, are we kidding ourselves? Is this over?
This race is clearly not over. First of all, for all the polls, and I've been involved in some private polling, the race is going to be decided in 6 states probably. And in those states, in some of them Trump may have a point or two lead, but all of them are within a margin of error. And it all depends who turns out. We had an interesting race in Ohio this week in a special where Trump won the district by over 30 points, and it was a 9-point Republican win. And the reason was low turnout. And, Trump is, in the polls, Trump is dependent on getting people who don't vote all the time. And they're not assured to come out. And so we'll see if in the end he has that magnetism to get them out that he did in 2016 and 2020 in most swing states. That will probably decide. Ordinarily, it used to be that Democrats would lose low turnout races and win high turnout races. But it's changed because Democrats have become the party of highly educated voters who do much better among older voters, and they're the people who come out every time. So turnout is going to be a big factor. But the main factor in this race really hasn't been decided, and that is who this race is about. If it's about Biden, which is the normal incumbency race, I mean, Craig knows that. We ran a challenge race against Craig in 1992 against George H.W. Bush, and it was about the incumbent, and we won because people were at least unhappy enough to vote out the incumbent. And that's the way it usually is in a reelection bid. But when Trump's on the ballot, it usually turns out to be about him. And given the way he's been acting, the erratic way, the unhinged way he's been acting, now that he's out of the courtroom for a while and going to get out at his rallies and make all these crazy statements, I think it's going to be more and more about him. And if this race is about Trump, Biden's going to win. Essentially, here's the Fromm rule. If it's a normal race about the incumbent, Trump wins. But if it's a race about Trump, Biden wins.
Craig, I need to push on this a little bit because every day now, Americans are seeing Joe Biden look confused, once again stumbling through some prepared marks. I mean, this is not your typical presidential campaign when you have somebody who is somewhat aging right in front of you.
Well, there's no doubt that Joe Biden is not going to get younger as this campaign goes on. And I think for the American people, they know who Joe Biden is. There's still a large, huge, number of them, about half, that are supportive of him. What I think, though, is the case, and I want to pick up on something else I said, that is, who's the race about, and what does Donald Trump do to make it about issues? Today in Washington, Donald Trump is meeting with congressional Republicans. And his campaign did exactly what they should do. They put out yesterday, so it's in the news today, a series of policy initiatives that he's going to discuss with these Republican members of Congress. Billing this event as kind of a coming together around the issues that are going to frame the campaign. I don't think there is a 1 in 10 chance that Donald Trump will stick to those talking points. I think he will, rage and fume at his judge, at these trials. They'll want to defund some of the investigations. What I mean by that is, I don't think Trump can stay on the rails when it comes to a substantive discussion. I think he just goes off the rails and talks about whatever is of concern to him that day about him. And so the likelihood, therefore, is that the campaign increasingly is about Trump because that's the only person Trump wants to talk about. And I agree with Al. If that's what the voters see, somebody out of control, I think in the middle of these close races, the voters are going to move away from that, even if it's to somebody they, as you say, see is aging, but it's somebody they know, and it's an administration they've gotten to them.
Well, Al, at the end of the day, it is about low information voters, right? I mean, and in many cases, they're not paying attention at all.
Well, they probably will, some of them will start to pay a little bit more attention as we get closer, but I'm not going to let you get away with that statement that Biden is old, looks confused. I think he's looked pretty goddamn good on the international scene at Normandy and now at the G20 summit. While Trump is ranting at a rally about sharks and boats with electric motors sinking. I mean, one candidate may be 3 years older than the other, but the younger candidate is the one who's showing the signs of dementia. And it's very clear. And Dave, you can't just take this sort of common conventional wisdom that is driven by Republican message, the Republican message machine, which is, I must admit, very good. But that's starting to change. There's a piece last night in Atlantic by Tom Nichols about Trump's gibberish. Gene Robinson had a column. I think,
Right.
The press goes through cycles on these things, and I think the next cycle will be to focus a lot more on Trump's, on how unhinged Trump is, how crazy his statements are. And we'll see. I mean, part of what the Biden campaign better be able to do is figure out how to get that out to through social media and other means to these less focused voters. But we're on D-Day, and Biden, as the leader of the free world should do, is leading the international honoring of the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And Trump is basically talking, his view on this is that the people who saved democracy are losers and suckers because they lost their lives. It just, I think that, Biden is not going to get younger. Lord knows, I wish we had a younger nominee, but we have what we have, and in the end, you got to make a choice. And if you want somebody who tells his voters he doesn't care about them, he only cares about himself, and thinks anybody who served in the military is a loser or sucker because he was a draft dodger. If you think that's the kind of person you need to run the country, then we'll get Trump. But to be honest with you, I think even the most disengaged voters, if they focus a little bit, are going to come to a different judgment. And Biden, with all of his warts, with his 81 years old or 82 years old, is still, in the end, will probably be our next president.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks so much indeed. We will see you next week.